Nihilism. Of course it depends how you define the word, but generally I consider myself to be an anti-nihilist. To give a definition of nihilism, I view it as a pessimistic belief system of great hopelessness, which believes nothing matters, life is pointless, values are baseless, nothing can be known, and an array of other depressing things, which make perfect ingredients for a sad, empty life. Nihilism is not simply the idea that meaning and morality are not real in an objective sense. More often than not, it appears as the idea that these things do not matter at all. To put it simply, nihilism is an ideology of emptiness and hopelessness. Now, depending on your definition, I may actually be a nihilist, but today we will use this definition because many people fit this definition, and I think it is important to give them a label, and I think nihilism is quite an appropriate word to fill that role. According to my definition, I am an anti-nihilist. I am not a believer in objective morality or objective meaning, although then again it really depends how you define the word objective, but I still place massive importance on morality and meaning, while nihilists generally do not. For quite some time I have viewed nihilism, the belief system of despair, hopelessness, and emptiness, as one of my greatest enemies. I viewed it as one of my greatest enemies, not just because I think it is harmful, for both the believer and the society, but because to a greater extent than most of the other views I oppose, it appealed to me. I understood its appeal, and many people around me could be labelled nihilists. I had to contend with this view, because the only way I could escape its grasp was by reasoning that I could not fall for it and that it was absurd and irrational. I first started to contend with the concept of nihilism when I embraced determinism. I initially made the irrational assumption that meaning and morality died with free will. This assumption was of course irrational. It was a conclusion which did not logically follow from the idea that free will does not exist. I eventually resolved this issue and embraced determinism without nihilism. Still, I continue to contend with nihilism, but I think I have finally overcome any appeal that it has. I have done this by tearing down the basis upon which this belief system sits. I was once not a nihilist, but now I am more than that. I am an anti-nihilist. I think the world is not a great place, but I do not give in to despair and hopelessness. I search for and have to a degree discovered meaning and purpose. I engage in a rational process of inquiry and discovery, which aims at discovering a basis for an ideal moral system. I aim to improve the lives of others and my own, because I think pain, pleasure, and well-being are fundamentally inescapable and real features of the human condition, and that these things are some of the fundamental characteristics of sentience, which make life meaningful. I think nihilism is harmful to the individual, as it strips their life of both meaning and the idea that meaning can be found. Furthermore, it strips from them morality. This harms them and the larger society. Suffering is real and it is bad. In promoting a lack of meaning and morality, nihilism leads to suffering and excuses it. In my view, nihilism is in many ways an immoral belief system. I think nihilism is harmful for everyone. Here, however, I am not going to argue it is harmful. I am going to argue that it doesn't make any sense. Firstly, I aim on proving wrong the common nihilist assumption that things which are not objective do not matter. Secondly, I will disprove the assumption that the temporary doesn't matter. Thirdly, I will prove the absurdity of nihilism itself. So on that note, let's get into things. Central to nihilism is the idea that only the objective matters. Objective can be defined in a range of ways, but here I will define it as something which exists independently of human thought. The nihilist claims objective morality and meaning do not exist, meaning no morality or meaning exist, and most importantly, that these ideas do not matter and are not worth taking seriously. This is a false assumption. Morality and meaning both exist respectively as social and individual constructs of thought. The nihilist will then claim these things are just constructs of the human mind and don't really matter. What exactly these people think makes something matter, I don't really know, and some are so unwilling to accept that something may matter that their nihilism verges on an illness of mind, a kind of ideological manifestation of depression. The nihilist claiming that social constructs do not matter is absurd for one simple reason. They are making use of a social construct to promote this idea. That social construct is, of course, language. The nihilist will surely have to recognize that language is a non-objective social construct that matters, as they use it every day, including most ironically, to argue against the importance of social constructs. Some people try to argue that language is objective. These people are firstly incorrect, as language is a construct of human thought, and secondly, basically any standard which views language as objective will also view morality as objective. So long as humans interact and want to live good lives, the urge to live a good life is the pursuit of well-being and pleasure and the avoidance of pain, which they are biologically predisposed to doing, social constructs do matter. Social constructs, such as language or morality, are just as important to achieving these ends as anything else, and they are social constructs which matter massively, and are in fact essential for the well-being of most people. I think it is important that I define the term matters, which nihilists are obsessed with. In my view, something which matters is something which is related to the inherent and biological part of the human condition, that is the pursuit of well-being and pleasure, and the avoidance of pain. By related, I mean it serves to aid our pursuit of these things in some way. You could say pain and pleasure doesn't matter all you want, but at the end of the day, if someone stabs you, you are going to feel it whether you like it or not, and it is not going to feel very nice. This is your nature, and denying it will get you nowhere, as you cannot escape it, and only someone with the mind of a foolish child would try. So, that which matters is anything related to fulfilling the interests of a biological organism, pursuing pleasure and well-being, and avoiding pain, ideally in the most rational way possible. To achieve what matters, we must contend with a range of factors. These factors are not solely objective, whatever that is even meant to mean. Language is basically vital to communicate with others, and think for and discover yourself, meaning that it is a social construct which aligns with what matters, the rational goal of pursuing well-being and pleasure, and avoiding pain. It is a social construct, not an objective reality, which is aligned with what matters. Something does not need to be objective in order to matter. The same example can be brought up for morality. Humanity's obsession with morality, the differentiation of right from wrong, clearly serves quite a purpose in preventing pain, as can be seen with the widespread criminalization of murder, for example, and maximizing pleasure by giving people a sense of meaning and pleasure and allowing them to enjoy life unimpeded by control that we deem to be unjust and immoral. Morality and language are good examples of social constructs that are not objective but seem to matter a great deal nonetheless, as they contribute greatly to helping us live good lives. They aid us in pursuing our inherent biological and psychological desires. The fact that they are not objective does not make them unimportant, and it is illogical to assume that these things not being objective makes them unimportant. The objective is that which exists independently from human thought. But human thought is the basis of our structure of society, conception of the world, and conception of ourselves. So how exactly does something not being objective mean it doesn't matter? This assumption is completely absurd. It just doesn't make any sense. Language is not objective, it is a social construct, but by speaking it every day, the nihilist reveals that they do value it in some way. Speaking is an endorsement of the idea that language has some value and purpose. The nihilist commits an act of extreme irony when they condemn the value of social constructs through a social construct. Nihilists make ridiculous assumptions which are often at odds with how they live their own lives. This is very simple. Any rational actor will agree avoiding pain matters, as pain is unpleasant. It is bad and the defining part of the negative side of sentience and the human experience. It is real and we must contend with it. Loneliness leads to pain, as biologically we are social creatures who require social interaction to pursue the positive defining aspects of sentience, such as well-being and pleasure. Loneliness must be avoided through interaction with other human beings, and essential to this is communication. Communication occurs through the use of language. Language is a social construct, which means it is not objective, and instead a creation of human thought. Language is a social construct which matters. It is that simple, and the common nihilist assumption that only the objective matters is absurd and obviously incorrect. Things do not need to be objective to matter, and I have little idea where this idea even came from. One guess I have is religion. Religion has for a long time tried to provide objective moral systems and objective meaning. Perhaps as many have turned away from religion in recent times, they have struggled to contend with the sudden removal of the objective foundation upon which morality and meaning previously sat. Rather than discovering the rational approaches and answers to these questions, they have embraced nihilism, and decided if these things are not objective, as we once thought they were, then they don't matter at all. This is a grave mistake, and as religion disappears, we must make sure we do not fall into this trap. I generally dislike religion, and I am pleased it has declined, but we must also be wary of the negative consequences of this decline, such as the onset of nihilism and the following hopelessness, despair, and amoral attitudes. All of the philosophical questions religion addressed with baseless claims of an objective morality or meaning can be addressed far more adequately through reason and rational inquiry. We do not need everything to be objective in order to live meaningful and moral lives in a strong moral society. We just need social constructs created through rational inquiry which exist to serve humanity. Moving on from that, we come to another common assumption that is made by many nihilists. The assumption that the temporary does not matter. Pain, pleasure, and well-being are all temporary, so they don't matter. Once again, this idea has no logical basis, and I am not completely sure where it even came from. It may once again have something to do with the abandonment of religion. Religion often promises eternal reward or eternal punishment. In comparison to such grand fantasies, the temporary nature of reality is beyond unimpressive and uninspiring. This is the impression many seem to be left with in an increasingly non-religious world, and once again, this can lead to people foolishly slipping into a nihilistic worldview. An alternative explanation for this could be that people, by their nature, are attracted to the eternal and less fazed by the temporary. For this reason, they created grand stories about eternal reward and punishment. The issue with this explanation is the fact that we seem very much biologically predisposed to care about the temporary. All the pain we experience is ultimately temporary, but that doesn't stop us flinching when we experience it. That doesn't stop us spending our lives avoiding temporary pain and pursuing temporary pleasure and well-being. Of course, I could now start blabbering about eternal recurrence, but I don't think I understand that idea particularly well, and as I do understand it, it seems like an interesting way of looking at reality, but not one which is based in any real truth. The nature of human existence is that everything is temporary. As has been said before, the only thing that is permanent is change. I don't think the temporary nature of existence is an excuse for nihilism, because I see no reason why the temporary does not matter. I think the temporary does matter. Temporary pain may not be as bad as eternal pain, but I still think it is unpleasant and worth avoiding for many of the same reasons. Temporary pleasure and well-being may not be as good as eternal pleasure and well-being, but it is still desirable for many of the same reasons. It seems we only have the temporary, so we may as well interact with it to live our best lives. This is once again an unavoidable part of human nature. Pain is bad and pleasure and well-being are good. These defining aspects of sentience are what gives life its meaning, and we must take them seriously. The nihilist will say that there is no reason that we should take pleasure or pain seriously. This will not stop them from recoiling when they touch a burning hot surface, or flinching when they believe their pain receptors are in for a dose of discomfort. This is because these things are inescapable components of human biology and psychology. You may think my argument is some kind of appeal to nature. My point is simple. Our senses and consciousness define our existence, and we cannot escape the basic realities of our biology. These things define our lives, and they matter in every sense of the word. Pleasure and well-being are good, pain is bad. This is the biological foundation of our existence, and no amount of nihilist reasoning will ever change that. So much of nihilism is attempting to reject the basic biological foundations of existence itself, the fact that pleasure and well-being are good and pain is bad. If someone truly believes the temporary does not matter, they will not care whether someone punches them in the face as hard as they can, or whether they don't punch them in the face at all. They will not care if all their family members are brutally murdered or allowed to continue living. To not care for these things is inhuman, and is at odds with human biology and the human condition. I strongly believe someone cannot exhibit such a lack of caring without some kind of serious psychological issue. Not caring for these things is at odds with the most basic foundation of what not just a human being is, but what a sentient creature is. I also think that on top of being at odds with the human condition, this idea that only the eternal matters is disgustingly greedy. All of the pain someone could subject you to in a lifetime is temporary, but no nihilist would refer to the differences between them being subjected to such pain or not being subjected to such pain as meaningless. And if they did such a thing, they would be lying. They would be deluding themselves. They would be denying the reality of who they are and the experiences central to the existence of a sentient creature. The temporary absolutely matters. Temporary pain, pleasure, and well-being is the defining characteristic of human existence, and I think every nihilist realizes this on some level. They have just deceived themselves into denying the nature of reality itself. Pain is bad and pleasure and well-being is good. These things are fundamental truths, and no argument will ever disprove that because these things are beyond argument. The suffering of many will not end when they hear an argument that suffering does not matter. Suffering is beyond that. This argument will inevitably fall back into the idea of pain, well-being, and pleasure. If temporary pain is not bad, then what makes eternal pain bad? If temporary pain can be shrugged off with ease, surely eternal suffering can be as well. Of what importance is the question of temporary versus eternal, and since when did this question become the defining feature of what matters versus what doesn't matter? One thing may be worse, but both are bad, and any reasonable person can acknowledge this. How can the factor of the temporary alone make something good if it was otherwise bad? How can we boil down what matters to temporary versus eternal? This is very bizarre. There is no basis for this, it just makes no sense. The irony of dismissing pain as important to meaning, but placing massive emphasis on the idea of temporary versus eternal. Two things which have no value until another factor describing exactly what is temporary or eternal is assigned to them. The same argument can be made in reverse for the importance of temporary pleasure and well-being. Contrary to common nihilist claims, the temporary matters, and this is an inescapable fact. The greatest flaw of nihilism is its absurd nature as a belief system. Nihilism believes that nothing can be known. This is absurd because this is a claim that we can know or do know that nothing can be known. How can we know that nothing can be known if nothing can be known? If we can know that nothing can be known, then we know one thing, that nothing can be known, which means that something can be known. This is self-contradictory and an absurd idea central to nihilism. Nihilism rejects truth, but the idea that morality, meaning, and truth do not exist is a truth claim. It is a claim about the nature of reality by a belief system which claims we cannot know the nature of reality. Nihilism posits that nothing can be known to be true, but this is itself a truth statement. Nihilism is absurd and self-contradictory. Nihilism says that morality does not exist and does not matter. Therefore, nihilism believes it is not immoral to murder, as morality does not exist and does not matter. The idea that murder is not immoral is still a moral position, as it relates to the rightness and wrongness of actions. This is still a moral position. It is a moral position held by a belief system which does not believe morality exists or matters. Nihilism is absurd and self-contradictory. As a belief system, it just doesn't make any sense. It is inherently contradictory and absurd. Nihilism is a completely absurd and ridiculous belief system. On top of this, it is immoral and harmful. It has the immoral consequences of leading to people abandoning morality and abandoning the need to improve society. It leads to people viewing life as meaningless and pointless, preventing them from pursuing meaning and purpose, and leading to them living sad and empty, despair-filled lives. With the decline of religion, we can expect many to be pulled towards nihilism, as they struggle to find a way without the religious lies of objective morality and meaning, and eternal reward and punishment that were so central to people's understandings of existence for so long. The important thing is making sure we do not fall from one flawed belief system into another. Life may lack objective meaning and morality, but these things are worth having around nonetheless, and a rational inquiry can discover and construct the ones that serve us the best. There is much in life that matters, and we must never delude ourselves into thinking this is not the case.